Story 1. Bad times also create weak people, damaged people, and people who want to make bad times for others. Hard times can help you become an empathetic person, or it can turn your heart cold. We are each too individualized for one saying to really apply across the board. Story 2. I think it's weird that people quote it so much. It's from a post-apocalyptic novel by G. Michael Hopf called Those Who Remain. I think it's weird that people quote it so much because in the book, it's presented as an inescapable cycle. In other words, there's nothing you can do about it. It's just how it is. If you read the quote and think, that's why we need strong men, then you miss the point of the quote. The point of the quote is that humanity is stuck in an endless cycle, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's very cynical. Also, I just kind of disagree with it. It reminds me of Nietzsche's "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." Nietzsche was talking about suffering here, basically saying that suffering is a gift, mostly in a philosophical sense. He wasn't literally saying that getting your ass kicked makes you a tougher person. It doesn't. But that's how we've decided to interpret it, even though clearly, obviously, there are plenty of things that can hurt you without killing you and make you weaker. Being crippled, contracting acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, being put in a coma, being born in North Korea, not receiving an adequate education, being enslaved. Let's be clear. Suffering is suffering. It's not a training montage. It's suffering. Suffering doesn't necessarily make you stronger. In my experience, certain types of suffering generally make people weaker. Material deprivation, for instance. Material deprivation is a type of suffering that mostly just robs you. It takes years off your life, it limits your opportunities, it worsens your health. Studies have shown growing up poor can even lower your intelligence quotient. I grew up in a really poor part of rural Arkansas, but I was lucky enough to get out and go to a pretty decent university. I remember when I got there, I assumed that I would be stronger than my classmates. Most of them had grown up privileged after all, and privilege makes you weak, right? One of the most unpleasant realizations of my life was the realization that growing up relatively poor had actually given me nothing over my classmates. They were smart. They had good attitudes. They worked hard. They were generous. Actually, they were much nicer, harder working, and giving people than the people I grew up with in Arkansas. They didn't struggle with substance abuse and depression the way the people I grew up with did. And the worst part, they weren't petty and afraid like the people I grew up with. That was a rude awakening. I thought I'd be tougher and more resilient than the rich kids I was suddenly going to school with. In fact, I realized growing up with less than them had only given me depression, bad drinking habits, and a chip on my shoulder. That sucked. Nietzsche's point was that since life is suffering, the more you suffer, the more you know about life. I guess I agree with that. But honestly, in my opinion, harder times create weaker men who abuse opiates more often and take care of their responsibilities less reliably. Suffering is really cruel that way, I think. And in any event, even if you take G. Michael Hopf at his word, he sees it as an endless cycle we're doomed to repeat over and over again. So what's the point? Story 3. It doesn't hold up through history, neither ancient nor recent. As some others say, bad times create damaged people and societies that get absorbed into thriving ones. Story 4. It is a nice statement but too simplistic to really mean anything or be accurate. If this were true, war-torn areas would eventually create strong enough men to stop this conflict, right? Then why is that not always the case? Story 5. Oversimplified statement regarding a historical pattern. Look at the rise and fall of various empires. They all had a period of struggle followed by growth and prosperity, and then crumbled. Story 6. A lot of things in history are cyclical. That much is true. This phrasing has the effect of absolving those who think of themselves as strong men from any of the downstream effects of their actions and of allowing them to label anyone they disagree with on how to handle issues as weak men who just cause problems and are thus worthy of neither respect nor consideration, which is often what causes the predictable negative effects downstream. Story 7. I think it's a reductive puritanical slogan that has no utility in a complex modern society. There is a despotic undertone to it. It's classic Dickensian social programming. Story 8. It's nonsense. I would love for someone to objectively demonstrate this thought process. Like, pick a clear, demonstrable historical example with clearly defined metrics of strong men and weak men. where these clearly defined strong men created good times, and the clearly defined weak men that resulted created bad times. Also, define what constitutes good times and bad times. Story 9. I think it's not accurate. Bad and good are completely subjective and relative. So are strong and weak. One person's idea of strong is completely different from another's. This is just something a boomer says. Story 10. People do not fit into little philosophical quotes. Good parents tend to make good kids. You do not see doctors and architects with kids who stab people over drugs or a postcode. Story 11. In theory, it makes sense. People who do not face hardships in life and who focus on a life of decadence and leisure have trouble dealing with adversity. A society that avoids making hard decisions and instead focuses on short-term gains, kicking that can down the road, will lead to bigger problems in the future. Historically, many societies have followed that pattern. The early rise of the empire, where people live lives of hardship but overcome it and rise to prominence. Then, within a few generations of affluence, those qualities that made their society successful in the first place are no longer required, and things start to unravel at the edges. But of course, it's easy to look back at history, simplify cause and effect, and do a little revisionism to fit your narrative, so I do not know how well that holds up when trying to predict the rise or collapse of future or present societies. Of course, try to define what makes a strong man or a weak man, and you are going to get some pretty interesting answers from people too. And not many people are going to say they are a weak person, so I would take this saying with a big pile of salt. Story 12. Like most cliches, it sounds good at first, almost like wisdom, but it doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. Lots of strong men live in good times, and weak men in bad times. Life just isn't as simple as a cliche. Story 13. I think there's some merit to it if you take a look at how hard refugee families work after immigrating. They work as if their life is on the line, compared to those people who were born with a silver spoon. This also somewhat ties into the old Chinese saying, wealth doesn't last past 3 generations. Humans seem pretty cyclical in nature if you ask me. Story 14. I think a lot of people who view themselves as strong men use this as an excuse to be toxic individuals because they still see themselves as being right despite often being the source of most problems in society. Or let me put it another way, it's probably one of the favorite sayings of the patriots who marched on Capitol Hill on January 6th. Story 15. I see a lot of unsavory people quote this, so my reaction is automatically negative. If I recall correctly, the sentiment is related to the Kali Yuga, and a lot of right-wing conspiracy and esoteric nationalist types have picked this up. It might be because of the work I do, but the only people I see repeat this have fully bought into social Darwinism. If I had to separate the statement from all that, I still wouldn't have a positive reaction. Strong men and weak men are obvious value statements, and I have to question what both of those mean. I'm going to assume whoever is repeating this has an interpretation of masculinity that doesn't match mine, like having to be stoic at all times, must be the provider or breadwinner or head of household, cannot take criticism, views all other men as competition, and so on. Story 16. I consider it a dangerous saying. Simple sayings seem like lenses that one can view the world through truthfully, but they often distort the truth. This saying allows anyone who believes it to reinforce their views endlessly by blaming others. Story 17. A fool needs to simplify a complex reality and often proclaim his strength, superiority, and righteousness. History is full of moments where one person's decision decided years of good or bad times for millions of other people. People are much more than the false binary of strong or weak. Story 18. It's complete nonsense. It's one of those things that sounds well articulated but has zero substance. I'll fix it. Good times create educated and healthy men. Educated and healthy times create strong men. Story 19. This is a true statement, and I have heard it a few times. Although I think this is a statement about society and politics as opposed to being targeted at men specifically. It's more about how civilizations rise and then decline and how the new civilizations repeat that cycle. Story 20. What is strong? What is weak? What is good? What is bad? These all have varying scales and meanings, and when we combine them in all possible ways, this statement could be interpreted in so many ways. All I see is there are good things to come from bad things, and good things can create bad things. Like yin and yang, there is not one without the other. It also seems like an infinite loop. Even though it seems like an infinite cycle, it might not necessarily be so. Story 21. Mostly gay cliché, people fixate on it literally because it uses the word men, and that appeals to people's couch fantasy of being an alpha masculine factory worker from the 20s. Story 22. It's a classic example of a statement that feels right but is totally wrong. Bad times do create strong men, but strong men create suffering, not good times. Look at Africa if you want proof. Story 23. Not universally true. Lots of people go through hard childhoods and miserable lives and end up dead from a fentanyl overdose in an alley. There is a line in the television show Burn Notice where the main character's mom is asking why her older son ended up a successful spy and having his life together, while the younger son was a failure with addiction issues. They had the same difficult father and troubled childhood. The person who answered was the guy who trained the older son. His answer was, "They are both broken. They just broke differently. If you smash a glass bottle in a bar fight, sometimes you get a pile of shattered glass, and sometimes you get a weapon you can stab a man with. Your older son broke and became a weapon. Hard times create way more shattered men than weapons or anything else of use." Story 24. I would not say strong. I would say resilient. For example, the Silent Generation, which went through the Depression and a World War and the Korean War, went on to pave the way for America to be the most prosperous nation in history. On the other hand, baby boomers are seen as coddled and entitled, weak, etc. Neil Howe and William Strauss, authors of Generations and The Fourth Turning, describe a generational cycle as detailed below. The four archetypes include prophets, idealist, come of age as self-absorbed young crusaders in an awakening when they attack institutional life in the name of personal and spiritual autonomy. Today's baby boomers, nomads, reactive, come of age as alienated young adults in an unraveling, during which time institutions are weak and distrusted, and individualism is strong and flourishing. Today's Generation X, heroes, civic, come of age as team-oriented young optimists in a crisis when institutional life is destroyed and rebuilt in response to a perceived threat to the nation's survival. Today's millennials, artists, adaptive, come of age as socialized and conformist young adults in a high, during which time institutions are strong and individualism is weak. Today's Generation Z or Homelanders. Story 25. I don't necessarily disagree with it, but it's more about how people seem to be more vigilant about corruption during hard times because they cannot afford to have so much taken and abused from them. They grow complacent toward corruption when times are good and things are easy. There are very few Western institutions that aren't totally rotten and corrupt, serving themselves and special interests right now, and it's no coincidence that it's like this at the peak of a 50-year bull market and monetary expansion. Story 26. It's true that good times can create complacency, which can lead to bad times. Generally, though, the opposite is true. Someone with advantages in life will be better off. There's no doubt about it. And strength is an antiquated concept, too. Your muscles won't help you much in a gunfight, even less against a drone strike. We're not monkeys. Power is made through friends and money, not through muscles. Story 27. This statement can be proven wrong by just thinking about it. It is used as a political tool because right-wingers like to think they are the strong men bringing good times, so they will fit it wherever their mind can twist it into. Story 28. We are never more than a few days away from the breakdown of society because civilization is only a thin veneer over the brutality of humankind. Act accordingly. Story 29. So I look at it more as strong men create a great society. A great society creates complacent masses. Complacent masses enable weakness. Weakness creates destabilization. Destabilization creates suffering, and suffering eliminates the weak men and breeds strong men. Story 30. Other people have thought of that. Strauss-Howe generational theory. Story 31. Good times and bad times both create weak and strong men. The quote doesn't say anything about the goodness of a man, and I promise you that a strong man who is a bad person creates much worse times than any weak man could. Story 32. I think that the people who quote it the most generally are the ones who think of themselves as strong men, missing the fact that strong men in the saying means good leaders and not physically strong. Story 33. The most inaccurate part of the statement is, strong men create good times. I can think of a lot of strong men that created some very, very bad times throughout history. Story 34. I really have no respect or love for the quote, because it's synonymously used by alternative right, alpha male influencers as propaganda to spread their extremely stupid nonsense opinions. Besides that, it really doesn't hold up throughout history, at least to my knowledge. Story 35. I agree in a certain context. Sometimes good times do make people weak and complacent, as seen in the rich man's son phenomenon. However, in ideal settings, I do think that good times can lead to better times. People just have to rise to the challenge. The enemy of progress is indolence, and luckily humanity will never run out of problems to solve. It is about preparing the next generation of youth to face the problems in front of them rather than accepting mediocrity. We become lazy and complacent, and hard times can jolt us out of that and awaken us as a society. However, the potential is always there.